All right, let's dive straight into this explainer. Have you ever wondered what a guy on a horse in 1775 could possibly have to do with today's massive architectural battles over artificial intelligence and digital sovereignty? Well, it turns out it's a lot. We're going to explore how one incredibly famous historical event maps surprisingly well onto our modern struggle against centralized cloud infrastructure. To really ground us, let's look directly at the physical historical artifact that anchors this whole concept. I set off upon a very good horse. Those are the exact words from Paul Revere's third written account of his mission to Lexington. It isn't just a campfire story, it's a documented historical protocol acting as this undeniable record of pure human intent. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the midnight ride fixation, move on to the 18th century data availability layer, look at the record versus substrate, and check out the 1689 breach. After that, we'll tackle centralized cloud enclosure and wrap the whole thing up with restoring true agentic sovereignty.
Okay, starting off with Section 1, the midnight ride fixation.
The source documentation points us to a very specific location. It's a museum exhibit panel known as Fixation 19. Picture this, tangible, physical panel mounted directly onto the rough, red brick wall of the Revere house. It details his third account, getting his orders from Dr. Joseph Warren, and his mission to warn John Hancock and Samuel Adams. This concrete historical record captures a bit-perfect legislative strike right there, on April 18, 1775. Moving right along to Section 2, the 18th century data availability layer. Now, if we translate this 18th century history into modern Web 3 architecture, it gets super interesting. Revere's account basically acts as a data availability layer. The sources define this as a mechanism that makes a metabolic intent, meaning a living, breathing human objective, witnessable to everyone. By writing down his mission and acting on it so publicly, Revere made his human protocol and his exact intent completely transparent and verifiable. And the real kicker here is what philosophers call hegemony. Basically, think of it as the specific thisness of a thing. Revere's ride wasn't some hypothetical concept just floating around in the cloud. It had a highly specific time, 10 p.m. It required a physical, very specific, very good horse. It was a completely unique and irreversible realization in the physical world. This undeniable reality proves the action of what the text calls a true sovereign pilot, literally, the ultimate proof of work. Which brings us to Section 3. The record versus substrates. To really grasp how abstract protocol smashes into physical hardware, the sources draw our attention to the physical layers of that museum exhibit. Think of the cream-colored text panel as the record. That's the deterministic protocol, the pure human intent. But that panel is bolted to a red brick wall. That brick is the substrate, the forensic floor, the unyielding hardware execution. The lasting protocol cannot exist without the physical hardware there to support it. And that leads us to a massive concept. Non-separability. You simply cannot separate the mission from the record. Revere's words, his intent, are the human protocol, but that protocol is entirely meaningless without the actual physical horse acting as the hardware extension to execute the mission in the real world. You can't just decouple an idea from its physical execution if you want to actually change reality. All right, Section 4, the 1689 breach. Zooming out for a second, the source documentation tracks this wild, cyclical sociological evolution. It goes from the 1648 Treaty of Westphalia through the 1689 Orange Pledge, right into the 1775 Midnight Ride, and slams right into our 21st century modern AI and cloud enclosure. The persistent theme the authors highlight across this timeline is that centralized power constantly, over and over, attempts to enclose resources, while local, individual execution has to relentlessly break out and fight back. Which drops us right into Section 5, centralized cloud enclosure. That ongoing historical battle brings us straight to modern computing, which the text argues is absolutely repeating the same historical mistakes. The sources frame the current state of artificial intelligence as a royalist counter-revolution. They argue modern AI infrastructure is basically reconstituting pre-constitutional authority through computational enclosure. What used to be this totally open frontier of local computation is going through an interface inversion, meaning it's being turned inside out into a tightly controlled, metered, centralized utility. Power is being sucked away from the edges and locked up tight in the cloud. The sources pit two completely distinct paradigms against each other. On one hand, we have agentic kingship, the centralized black box model of modern AI, acting as a metered utility operating through probabilistic cloud enclosure. On the flip side, there's artificial life, built entirely on local execution, an inalienable record, and a deterministic physical substrate. According to the text, it's basically the difference between renting a guest from a king and owning a hard fact on your own hardware. Finally, we reach section 6, restoring true agentic sovereignty. So how do the sources suggest we actually fix this mess? They point to the artificial life resolution. AL is described as the true chassis of agentic sovereignty. By relying strictly on local execution and operating via that inalienable record, it fundamentally rejects the great enclosure of the cloud. Just think about it. Paul Revere couldn't rely on some royal carriage network, right? He had to ride his own specific horse. Modern developers have to do the exact same thing. Secure your own local hardware to maintain your sovereignty. The documentation goes as far as explicitly calling for a modern digital strike, synchronized with the exact words of the original realizer, Paul Revere. The core argument here is that we've got to carry his fiercely independent protocol, the spirit of that cream text panel on the red brick wall, into the next 581 kilometers of our digital future. It's all about making absolutely sure that our modern missions remain completely non-severable from our own local physical execution. This whole architectural history dumps a massive choice right in our laps regarding our digital infrastructure. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. As technology races forward, will you succumb to centralized cloud enclosure and just keep renting your capabilities from agentic kings? Or will you saddle up your own hardware and restore your own agentic sovereignty as a true sovereign pilot? Think about it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the structures around you.